All right. Good afternoon, everyone in the room and on Zoom. Thank you for joining us in person or virtually with our, like I said, hopefully snowy Sunday that everybody has promised on the news. Thank you for being here and joining us for this wonderful program. My name is Brianna Quaid. I am the Community Engagement Coordinator here at the Historical Society of Pennsylvania, and I am delighted to welcome you to our program this afternoon, Century of Black History Commemoration, which is in partnership with the local branches of ASALH, the Association for Study of African American Life and History. The Historical Society of Pennsylvania was founded in 1824 and proudly serves as Philadelphia's Library of American History. Our collection contains over 22 million manuscripts that hold stories of all Americans with a particular emphasis on American history, ethnic and minority groups, science and industry, the arts, and genealogical research. We are fortunate today that this program is generously funded by Regina J. Vaughn. And we are hosting this program in conjunction with our current exhibit, Changing Faces of Independence, Pennsylvania in the 1800s. And that work is supported through a grant from the Philadelphia Funder Collaborative for the semi-quincentennial, got to get that right, a fund of the National Philanthropic Trust. And additional support is provided through the Lilly Foundation. And just a few housekeeping notes for those that are on Zoom. Welcome. You already have been putting where you're from in the chat. Please feel free to keep doing that. And any Q&A you have as well. It is being recorded, so we will send the link out to all participants. And if you are in the room with us, please feel free to stay after. We have a small reception, and you also have a chance to look at our exhibit. And for those that are online, please do come down to view the exhibit if you have not seen it already. All right, with that, I'm going to turn it over to one of our wonderful partners. We've had the opportunity and fortune to collaborate with the PhilaMontco and Philadelphia Heritage branches of ASALH over the past year through work with one of our previous exhibits, Voices of the Community, and with this wonderful program and just being, great partners. And I'm going to bring up Miss Regina Vaughn, who is the president of the Philadelphia Heritage Branch.
Thank you for everybody braving the elements and not quite listening to our mayor, because you know we're supposed to be off the streets by 4 o'clock. So we have a hard stop at 3:30. So we're going to devote most of the time to Dr. Higginbotham. But I just want to welcome you on behalf of the Philadelphia branches of ASALH, the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. Our branch was co-founded by the father of Black history in 1927. So Philadelphia Heritage is celebrating its 99th year. And we are sister branches with PhilaMontco, particularly with the last two presidents, Dana King and the wonderful president, Karen Williams. And we partner for the past 16 years on an annual Black History program. And we are so excited to be here with the Historical Society of Pennsylvania. I have been the president for 14 years too long. And I've been all over this city trying to get a historical society, some repository. And do they return my emails? Do they return my phone calls? No. But the Historical Society did. And Karen was the one who sealed the deal. But if you know Karen, you can't say no to her. So we welcome you today, and we have more to say, but we definitely will be back again. Justina will talk about one of the programs we want you to all to come back in April, which should be nice spring weather. Oh, sorry, didn't bring my runner show up. That's why we need younger people here. Yes, we will send out the whole biography for Dr. Higginbotham. You can, of course, Google her online. On a personal note, she has presented twice for the Philadelphia Heritage Branch. This will be her third time presenting to us. On a personal note, I'm writing along with a few of the other branch members, our branch history going into our centennial next year. And Dr. Higginbotham, when she was last here, said to me, Regina, you have to read the journal. I said, wait a minute, to myself, of course, am I back in grad school? I need to read a journal. But it's been wonderful actually reading the journal of Negro history, and I now call it African American history, because it's Dr. Woodson's words himself. So I bring you Dr. Evelyn Higginbotham, a renowned historian from Harvard, a mentor, and just a good historian, even though we're probably the same age, but someone who's done the academic work to mentor. Hear ye her. Okay. Am I done now?
I'm speaking now. Can everyone hear me? Yes. Well, I want to thank the Historical Society of Pennsylvania, the Heritage Branch of Asala, the PhilaMontco Branch for this invitation to speak to you. I would have certainly preferred speaking to you in person today. I really would so much prefer that, but the weather is not agreeing with us. So I pray that all of you are safely watching wherever you are. You know, in this year, 2026, when we commemorate the centennial of Negro History Week and also the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, I'd like to speak to you on the topic, Black history in times of self-evident truths, half-truths, and untruths. And to do so, I must put Black history itself in historical perspective because of the several centuries of efforts on the part of Black people to historicize. And by that word historicize, I mean to bring a historical perspective and significance to facts, events, dates, and people. In the early years of our nation, Black people were engaged. We were engaged in acts of historicizing. They were involved in rendering the historic in various ways. Indeed, Black historicizing by means of celebrations and commemorations occurred before the Civil War, thus well before Carter G. Woodson and the celebration, the first Negro History Week in 1926, which occurred in February. And, you know, because it includes the birthdays of both Frederick Douglass and Abraham Lincoln. And it wouldn't be correct to think that published writings on Black history began with the scholarly work found in Woodson's erudite, academic-oriented Journal of Negro History, which was launched under his editorship in January 1916, soon after the founding of the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History in 1915. And now you know we call it the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, ASALH. And yet we call Carter G. Woodson the father of Black history. And we do so rightfully. Yes, I say rightfully, because it is to him this metaphorical paternity is definitely due, because it is from him the organized and multifaceted academic and social movement that we call Black history was born, and his national organization, ASALH, and its local branches have continued from generation to generation for the purpose of researching and writing and widely disseminating, promoting the history of people of African descent. Woodson sought to educate, to inspire, and to instill in his own people, young and old, a sense of racial pride. And he also sought to advance racial equality in America by providing what he called the whole truth to the whole public. Now, in reflecting on Black history from a historical perspective, I'd like to do so from a chronological point of view by focusing on 3 time periods. The first period is before Woodson. The second period is Woodson's era, and the third, the decade after Woodson's death. Self-evident truths, half-truths, and untruths are characteristic of each period, and each period holds a unique message for us today. So first, the period of Woodson. In the free Black communities of Boston, Philadelphia, New York, and other places, annual celebrations occurred to mark events of historical significance. After that happened, after those events occurred, sermons and other speeches given on those occasions were published and disseminated. For example, Boston's Black community had a long tradition of recognizing Crispus Attucks Day. And Crispus Attucks was the fugitive from Framingham, Massachusetts, not far from where I live in Newton, Massachusetts. He was the first to die in the Boston Massacre. So if we could see the PowerPoint, Boston Massacre on March 5th, 1770. And this is the lithograph that was created at that time by Paul Revere. Well, from 1870 as late as 1858, because it's still before the Civil War, Black Bostonians were gathered to celebrate Crispus Attucks Day. The Black leader, John Rock, who was an abolitionist, he was also a physician and a lawyer, gave a published, well, he made a speech which was published. And in that speech in 1858, he prophesied the Civil War. The next PowerPoint is the Philadelphia commemoration, ending the British slave trade and the British slavery in the Caribbean. Years earlier, in 1842, so this is even before 1858 in Boston, Black Philadelphians held a parade to commemorate the 8th anniversary of Britain's abolition of slavery on its islands in the Caribbean. And in this case, the Black Philadelphian celebration of diasporic Black unity turned into heartbreak. As they marched down Lombard Street, they were brutally attacked by a violent racist mob. While Carter G. Woodson was the most influential, the most memorable voice in calling for truth regarding the history of people of African descent, the emphasis on truth in scholarship can be found in the writings of Black authors well before the Civil War. So in this PowerPoint of Jacob Osen was an early writer of Black history, and he published the pamphlet called A Search for Truth, or An Inquiry for the Origin of the African Nation. That was the whole title, A Search for Truth, or Inquiry into the Origin of the African Nation. This was published in 1817, in the years of the early Republic. Osen was a free man, a free Black man, a teacher, a minister, and anti-slavery advocate. He lived in New Haven, Connecticut, and we don't have a birth date for him, but he died in 1828. And what makes Osen stand out in this era of the early Republic is his accounting of the culture and humanity of people of African descent. The very title of Osen's short history, The Search for Truth, puts him at odds with the leading intellectuals of Western thought. In fact, Osen's pamphlet called for the complete refutation and negation of the widely touted historical accounts of Africa found in the writings by the European and American Enlightenment thinkers of the 18th and early 19th centuries. And while European thinkers were hailed for their contributions to American political thought, to the ideas of individual liberty and democratic principles, these very same writers presented negative images of Africa and its people. So let me give you some examples. The Scottish philosopher David Hume wrote in 1748 that he considered Black people, and I'm quoting him, to be naturally inferior to the whites. He wrote, "There never was a civilized nation," and I'm quoting, "there never was a civilized nation of any other complexion than white, nor even any individual eminent either in action or speculation. No ingenious manufactures, no arts, no sciences." That was Hume. In 1764, the German thinker Immanuel Kant, in comparing the white and Black races, stated, and I quote him, "So fundamental is the difference between these two races of man, and it appears to be as great in regard to mental capacities as in color." Their writings buttress justifications for slavery. And as we know, the majority of the towering figures whom we call the American founding fathers were slaveholders. So the very title of The Search for Truth by Jacob Osen reveals his revisionist agenda. Osen was refuting the pejorative, the negative assertions of the powerhouse, this powerhouse group of Enlightenment thinkers who were arrayed against the idea of human equality. Osen stated, and I quote, "I well know that the task is arduous to inquire into this subject on account of opposers, for they are many, but ought I to give up the inquiry after truth? On this account, certainly not." So let's move on from the PowerPoint on OSIS. And I'd like to talk to you today about the idea that Jacob Osen was not alone. A large number of Black writers throughout the 19th century would take up the task of historicizing. And the early Black writers published works that told of a proud African heritage. They called out the untruths found in the writings of the pro-slavery scholars and theologians and physicians and other members of the general public who promoted theories of Black inferiority. The 19th century Black authors relied heavily on the Bible. That was their primary source for knowledge about Africa. And they also referenced the Greek and Roman classical works of Homer and Herodotus and Plutarch by noting their statements on African kingdoms and people of African descent. The early Black writers argued that the Bible confirmed an image of Africa that was not degraded, and in fact, just the opposite, since the Bible mentions Egypt and the kingdom of Nubia and the kingdom of Cush and Ethiopia. Now, the early Black writers of history also affirmed the self-evident truths that are set forth in the Declaration of Independence and what we will be celebrating on July 4th. Their works are replete, the Black writers are replete with the words, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that that all men," and by that they meant humankind, "are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." And Blacks quoted those words at the time, and they are still quoting those words today. But in the early 18th century, in the early 19th century, they aligned those words with the biblical passages from the Bible, and especially the book of Acts, the chapter 17. If you went to church today, you know that Acts chapter 17, verse 26 of the Bible reads, "God hath made one blood of all nations of men for to dwell on the face of the earth." And this one blood assertion, according to the 19th century Black historicizers, attested to the unity and equality of all humankind. And this assertion appears as integral to Black literary traditions that grew throughout the entire 19th century as a result of the burgeoning print culture that began in the Civil War, that began before the Civil War, excuse me, that began before the Civil War in northern free Black communities. And this is evidenced in their schools, in their newspapers, in their local and state national conventions, in Black literary societies, fraternal organizations, in their church denominational life, in abolitionist newspapers, and the narratives by the formerly enslaved men and women. So historical writings by and about Blacks were conveyed to readers in all these contexts. So the next PowerPoint is a man named James W.C. Pennington, and he hails from New York, for you New Yorkers. James W.C. Pennington, a fugitive from slavery from Silver Spring, Maryland, if I have any Marylanders here. He flees from slavery and he becomes a leading minister and abolitionist and scholar and civil rights activist in New York City in the 2 decades before the Civil War. Pennington authored a textbook of the origin and history of the colored people. And this was published in 1841. And like Oson's pamphlet, but far more extensive in length and depth, Pennington's Black history textbook emphasized the pursuit of truth. The truth being that Black people were not inferior. They were not an inferior race. They were part of the human family. They were not a different species of humanity. And Pennington wrote in his book, and I quote him, "Prejudices are to be uprooted. False views are to be corrected. And truth must be unveiled and permitted to walk forth with her olive branch." And Pennington was also explicit, as were other Black writers in the decades before and after him, in his stating his motivation to bring Black historical knowledge to Black families, to Black teachers and students, through a narrative that would not leave them feeling embarrassed or ashamed about their ancestral origins. And I quote again Pennington, "I shall now present a chain of facts to prove the notion of our inferiority to be false, and I shall endeavor to show how such notions are absurd." Well, the publication of his textbook in 1841 reveals its timely appearance and relevance as a counterpoint to the racist theories and untruths posited by his white contemporaries. And some of those contemporaries were renowned scholars in European and American universities. So the eminent German philosopher Georg Hegel wrote in 1837, so that's not long, that's a few years before Pennington. Hegel wrote, "Africa had no history." I quote Hegel, "It was the unhistorical, the undeveloped spirit." In Philadelphia, at the University of Pennsylvania, Professor Samuel Morton taught, and he enjoyed fame from his books. And he published books in 1839 and another in 1844. So this is all at the same time that Pennington is writing. And his field was something called craniology. And they would measure the cranium, the skull, of people of different races. And Morton was praised for his scientific measurement of skulls, which appeared in his books as a confirmation of the hierarchical ranking of the world's various races. And of course, whites were at the top and Blacks were at the very bottom. And Morton also introduced the theory of polygenesis, which meant that Blacks were a distinctly different species of humanity than whites. And this idea was influential in academia, and it was certainly influential at Harvard, because the professor of natural science, Louis Agassiz, was a firm believer in polygenesis. Well, the 19th century Black writers of history, like Osen and Pennington and a host of others, before and after the Civil War, completely challenged this way of thinking as untruth. And their historicizing was not, and this is important to note, these Black writers were not trained men with PhDs in history. So their accounts of the past were filled with the language of religion. And one of the greatest was a man named George Washington Williams. So let's see him on PowerPoint. Now, this is also, he's such an important figure because he wrote the 2-volume history of the Negro race in America, which was published in 1883. And in it, he declared, before Romulus founded Rome, before Homer sang, when Greece was in its infancy, just a baby, and the world quite young, ancient Meroe, and Meroe, the ancient pyramids of Meroe are still found today in present-day Sudan. And he says it was the chief city of the Negroes along the Nile. Now, with a divinity degree, because he did have a degree, but it was from Newton Theological Massachusetts in Newton, Massachusetts, the Newton Theological Institution, Williams sought to vindicate his racial heritage. And the historian John Hope Franklin has written a biography of Williams. And John Hope Franklin described Williams as the first real historian among the 19th century Black writers of history, because of Williams' extensive citing of sources and footnotes. But Williams introduces his book with a history of Africa that adopts a biblical analysis similar to the early Black historians. And while the pervasive language of religion may seem unscholarly to us today, I must emphasize to you that this style of writing was adopted by 19th century writers, white and Black. The key difference between Black and white readers or writers was simply this. Black historical texts made a special point to call out, to refute the racial untruths as anti-biblical, and those untruths, according to the Black historians or the historicizers, they were anti-biblical according to the Genesis story. They were anti-biblical according to the passage that God made humanity of one blood from the book of Acts. And they were anti-American, as given by the Declaration of Independence and its self-evident truths that the Creator made humankind equal and endowed with the inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So I'd like to talk to you, if the PowerPoint, we won't look at the PowerPoint right yet. I'd like to talk to you about examples of historicizing in the pre-Woodson era. And I want to do it by pausing to acknowledge what my colleague, Jarvis Givens, and some of you know Jarvis Givens at Harvard for his wonderful book on Woodson and the teachers who worked with Woodson. But he's done a very recent book called I'll Make Me a World. And that's a line taken from the wonderful creation poetry of James Weldon Johnson. And what Jarvis Givens does in this book, and it's beautifully written, he talks about memory work. His memory work is similar to what I'm saying as historicizers, but it's more about passing on these ideas. And in this memory work, one of the stories that he focuses on is Nat Turner. And Nat Turner is a freedom fighter for slavery. And he reminds, Gibbons reminds us that Black communities throughout the 19th and 20th centuries would remember the name Nat Turner. They would remember his story. It would be passed down through the generations, even into the 21st century. And I say 21st century because Nat Turner's Bible is housed in the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C. And, the revolt of Nat Turner was early in 1839. But I'd like to add to Jarvis Given's important meditation on Black remembrance by saying that Black memory work also included respect and, in some cases, reverence for white abolitionists. I, as a teacher of both white and Black students, think it's important for our students to recognize that both white people and Black people were involved in the anti-slavery movement, and they were also involved in the civil rights movement. So in the 2026 release of From Slavery to Freedom, and I want to give a shout out to it because it is now my third authored version of that classic originally written by John Hope Franklin in 1947. But in the 2026 release of this book, which is, if I had it, I would have brought it with me. I wrote about Black and white anti-slavery activists and the daring rescues made possible by their concerted efforts in the Vigilance Committee of the Pennsylvania Anti-Slavery Society in Philadelphia. So to speak of one racial group and not the other would constitute half-truth. So let me give you a different but equally powerful corollary to Nat Turner, and that is the memory of John Brown. And my example comes from the history of the early all-Black civil rights organization, the Niagara Movement, which many of you may know that it began in 1905 when Du Bois sought to rally the opposition to Booker T. Washington's failure to outwardly condemn. I must tell you that Booker T. Washington was secretly helping to fight segregation, but he wasn't outwardly doing it. And Du Bois wanted an outward protest against the federal government's legitimation of practices of racial inequality. And just as the federal government and the Supreme Court had upheld racial inequality in the Dred Scott decision, recall the Dred Scott decision says, the Negro has no rights, free or Black. The Negro has no rights that the white man is bound to respect. Well, just as the Supreme Court upheld that decision in 1857, so before the Civil War, the decisions of the Supreme Court in the late 19th century, and particularly Plessy v. Ferguson, proved supportive of the racist Southern state laws that were being instituted for racial segregation and Black disenfranchisement. So the Niagara Movement got its name because the Black men, and in 1905, it was only Black men who were invited by Du Bois. They couldn't stay or meet in white hotels on the New York side of Niagara Falls, so they met on the Canadian side. But the story that I want to share with you occurred the very next year, in 1906. Now, by then, the movement had grown from a small group of courageous men to 150 Black men and women. And they met in 1906, this Niagara Movement. The attendees met at Storer College in Harpers Ferry, West Virginia, where John Brown attempted to free the slaves in 1859. The Friday of the Niagara Movement was called John Brown's Day, and it began early in the morning with a pilgrimage to the John Brown Fort, which had been the arsenal from which Brown and his white and Black compatriots, because we're both Blacks and whites fighting, hoped to secure weapons and thereby arm the enslaved. But John Brown's plan wasn't successful. He was captured and hanged. A newspaper account at the time reported that on his way to the scaffold to be hanged, John Brown kissed a baby in the arms, a Black baby he kissed in the arms of its mother. Now, I don't know if the story was true or not, but the story was memorialized in a painting by a white artist born in Ireland, but he became American in the 1880s. So the PowerPoint of this famous painting, the painting can be seen, I believe it's at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It's in some place very big. Well, if we then move to 1906, the coverage by the Black press portrayed a moving account of the Niagara Movement's act of remembering John Brown. The minister who stood at the head of the group was described as having removed his shoes and walking barefoot in pilgrim style. The black press described the events as follows, and I'm quoting, all went into the sacred, they used that word, sacred edifice, and sang John Brown's body. And they marched single file around the fort, singing the same song, John Brown's body. Now, unquote. Now, at the site, all these Black people who came there to emphasize protests of what was happening in the United States in the early 1900s, they revered the memory of John Brown. One or maybe two, but Frederick Douglass's son was there, and he said he remembered meeting John Brown. Well, on this John Brown's day, W.E.B. Du Bois spoke eloquently, but the greatest applause was given to the AME minister, the social gospel leader, Reverdy Ransom. And Reverdy Ransom was called thunderer of a great oration. And I quote from the news story. His speech was a rare masterpiece of argument and exposition, a classic of effective and convincing oratory. The large audience frequently interrupting the speaker for several minutes. Among many other things, Reverdy Ransom said, and I am quoting the newspaper, God sent John Brown to Harper's Ferry to become a traitor to the government in order that he might be true to the slave. At the end of his speech, according to the article, the audience stood up in prolonged applause and sang again, John Brown's body. Now, you can remove the Hoverton painting because I want to move to our second point, and that is the era of Carter G. Woodson. You know, this era marked a dramatic change in the narrative style and in just the way of doing history. The technological, industrial, and other innovative hallmarks of the turn of the century in America ushered in a progressive and rapidly 20th century modernity that included restructuring universities. Before, the universities were very heavily religious in their curricular emphasis. But in the 1900s, the early 1900s, they moved away from this former religious orientation to the new social sciences and to science. And they found in these new, really, disciplines of sociology and economics, political science, and history. And unlike the historicizing of the mostly self-taught 19th century Black writers, the publications of Carter G. Woodson and W.E.B. Du Bois represented that of university-trained Black scholars with degrees in the field of history. In fact, Du Bois even had a degree in sociology because he studied in Germany. He studied sociology in Germany after he received his PhD in history at Harvard. Now, the two men, Du Bois and Woodson, would be joined over the next decades by famous Black sociologists and anthropologists and economists, and they all used what they call the scientific method. And we can see this in 1916 when Woodson established the Journal of Negro History. And he called it that, we call it now the Journal of African American History, but he also described it as a, quote, quarterly scientific review. And Woodson associated the word truth with the words of science and scientific study in the pages of his scholarly journal. Another example is Black Reconstruction. If you look at that PowerPoint on Black Reconstruction, and this is the book that's published by Du Bois in the 1930s, and his perhaps most well-known chapter is titled The Propaganda of History. And you can imagine where that's going, the propaganda of history, because he totally rejects the way Reconstruction was written about by these white scholars. And these white scholars who were writing about Reconstruction were very well read. I mean, they would have been the books that Carter G. Woodson would have read in school, and many of the people who went to school in the 1910s and 20s and 30s and 40s would have read. But in the 1930s, he has this famous chapter in which, and I quote him, "If history is going to be scientific, if the record of human action is going to be set down with the accuracy and faithfulness of detail, which will allow its use as a measuring rod and guidepost for the future of nations, there must be some set standards of ethics in research and interpretation." So both Du Bois and Woodson believed that facts had to be accurate, and that the accuracy of truth would be foundational to equality in America. So it is in service to truth that Carter G. Woodson sought to fill in the gaps in the historical record, to unmute the silences, to rectify all those omissions that led to partial truths, half-truths, and just downright lies in the present American story. So when we look at the Woodson book, the textbook in our history, the book was called The Negro in Our History, and it was in 1922. When we look at that book, when he uses the word our history, he is referring to the American heritage and the contribution of Black people to our nation's history and its very identity. Woodson sought to destroy the perception of America as the white man's country, and that term was used often. I think it's even used in some places today. America is the white man's country. And one of my favorite quotes from Woodson's famous book, this 1920 book, is to call out the untruths and the half-truths, all that's missing from the Black presence. So this is what he says. He said, "We should not learn less of George Washington. In other words, we should know who George Washington is, but we should learn something about the 3,000 Negro soldiers of the American Revolution who helped to make the father of our country possible." And then he goes on to say, well, we should not fail to appreciate the unusual contributions of Thomas Jefferson, and he's meaning his words in the Declaration of Independence. But we should invite attention to one of his outstanding contemporaries, Benjamin Banneker. And then Woodson goes on to say, well, we should certainly pay tribute to Abraham Lincoln, but we should ascribe to the over 178,000 Negroes who had to be mustered into service of the Union before it could be preserved, and because of their heroism demonstrated they were entitled to freedom and citizenship. So you can remove that. And I just want to talk to you about Woodson's belief in the transformative power of Black history to tell the whole truth. He loved that word, those words, whole truth. And fueled by this belief, he began to build an arsenal, just an arsenal of high caliber work written by professional historians, Black and white alike. And the Asala conferences were racially integrated many years before any of the other professional historical organizations. And during its first 4 years, the Journal of Negro History was the only scholarly journal. I shouldn't say 4 years. During its first 4 decades, really up until close to 1960, the Journal of Negro History was the only scholarly journal dedicated to publishing articles on the history of Black Americans, as well as featuring primary source documents and bibliographies and book reviews on Black topics. And it was the only journal that devoted its pages to the history of African-descended people in South America, Europe, and Africa in these early years. For most Black historians, very few, very few, you might find one Du Bois or somebody, before the 1960s published their work. And when they did, it was infrequently. And even for white historians, especially the younger ones, the less established in the profession, the only place they could publish, if they were publishing about Black people, was the Journal of Negro History. And so Woodson brought Asala, this idea of The Truth of History and its work, Woodson brought together a nationwide team of Black college professors, public school teachers, librarians, ASALA branch members, and various community activists together, and they advanced the goal of bringing Black history to the whole public. This was another one Woodson used to like to say, bringing the whole history to the whole public. Now, after saying all this, I don't want to leave you with the impression that Woodson never got discouraged or that he just never felt any frustration, because that wouldn't be true. In his various writings, Woodson conveyed sometimes a deep sense of frustration. Sometimes he speaks of, it's scary, a sense of urgency. Let me give you one of his quotes. If a race has no history, he warned, if a race has no history, if it has no worthwhile tradition, it becomes a negligible factor in the thought of the world, and it stands in danger of being exterminated. Now, today, perhaps Woodson's choice of wording, exterminate, may seem a bit over the top. Perhaps it doesn't. But his extreme depiction certainly would have seemed plausible in the early 20th century, when Congress refused to pass laws ending lynching, when only 4 years after ASALA's founding, Black people in numerous cities throughout the nation, including DC, fell victim to the Red Summer of 1919. Call this because of the bloodshed from many urban riots against this growing Black urban population due to their great and ever greater migration out of the South and into northern cities during World War II. We know that in 1921 in Tulsa, Oklahoma, the Black section Greenwood, which had formerly been called Black Wall Street by W.E.B. Du Bois in the pages of The Crisis, but in 1921, Greenwood would be destroyed and many of its people killed in what is now called the Tulsa Race Riot. In Florida, in 1923, the predominantly Black Rosewood area was destroyed by a white mob from a neighboring time. But despite these difficult times, and they were difficult, Woodson never yielded to becoming immobilized by cynicism. He never gave up on the fight for truth, but instead kept coming up with new ideas. He just kept coming up with new ways to write and proliferate Black history. His annual reports on Negro History Week, starting with the first one in 1926, 100 years ago, and going forward, reveal an ever-widening reach. The Black History Commemorations stress the contributions of Black people to America as soldiers, artists, workers, educators, inventors, religious leaders, while at the same time highlighting a unique cultural heritage as Black people tied to other people of African descent on the continent of Africa and in its diaspora. Now, in this latter regard, emphasis focused on instilling pride in one's African heritage and in pride in the diasporic legacy in the form of knowing religious beliefs, folk tales, music, and visual arts. Now, in his annual reports on Negro History Week, Woodson identified events at HBCUs and also programs that were held on the weekend and at night for working people with day jobs. The reports described the growth and activities of Black History clubs. Negro History Week was especially important for promoting, or it was especially promoted by the Negro History Bulletin, and that was founded by Woodson in 1937. And the bulletin went out 9 months of the year to K through 12 teachers with their students and the larger public, and it featured the various ways elementary and secondary schools commemorated Black history, And they did so with oratory contests and school assignments, and sometimes entire plays, written and performed by students, appeared in the pages of the bulletin. I think one of the reasons why Woodson never lost faith in the transformative power of Black history was because he could see it blossoming in schools and libraries and other activities at the national level and at the local level. He noted, and he's talking about Black communities, Negro History Week can be regarded, and I'm quoting, as an observance of as much importance as the celebration of some of the national holidays. And I think another reason why Woodson did not succumb to cynicism was because he believed that truth and knowledge fostered a growing commitment in the struggle for racial equality. I quote him again, liberal-minded white persons were becoming interested in promoting the whole truth. And we continue to see this in his outreach and partnership with a variety of groups. And today we see it, don't we? I think of the work of the Philadelphia branches right now with historical and genealogical organizations, with the Pennsylvania, with your group, and the PhilaMontco group with its partnership with Mother Bethel to host a freedom school. And I'm excited, and I'll just tell the world, Regina, about your plans for the centennial. She plans, I'm not going to tell what the plans are, but look out for the centennial of the Philadelphia Heritage Branch in 2027, the oldest Asala branch. I just have to take credit. I had to remind them of this. Clearly, the Black History movement that we commemorate in 2026 did not end with Woodson's death in 1950. And let me just say, when I say reminded, the Philadelphia group invited me to give a speech, and they had the date back, so I had to get them back farther. The legacy of the Woodson era continues to inspire us, and this brings me to my final point, and that is the Black history movement after Woodson. And I want to share with you an aspect that I've not seen previously discussed, but it is an aspect that I knew intimately because of my father, Albert N.D. Brooks. The N.D. stood for Neil Dow, who was he was the mayor of Lincoln, a big prohibition speaker, and my grandfather was definitely a prohibition man. But my father, Albert N.D. Brooks, became the editor of the Negro History Bulletin after Woodson died. And he was also the secretary-treasurer of the association. And he managed the Asala National Office, which was also Woodson's home at 15th Street, 9th Street. And he did this until my father died in 1964. So on family trips, he would drive us to see my grandmother, my mother's mother, who lived in New York at 323 Edgecombe Avenue, for all you New Yorkers on the phone, on the line here. So they would drive us to New York, and we'd stop at Howard Johnson along the way. And on those trips in February, my father proudly wore this button, this large round button with the face of Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass on it. And I have to confess, I was a little bit embarrassed, a lot embarrassed. The button said, and I was a kid, okay? But the button said, "I am a proud American." Well, it was uncomfortable to see all these white onlookers, trying to figure out what this button stood for. I thought then it might have been a bit of an overstatement. But as those years progressed between 1958, when the Proud American theme was launched, and 1964, I came increasingly to recognize that the button symbolized Asala's unique role in the heightening activism of the civil rights movement. An article in 1962, for example, noted the importance of, quote, concerted efforts, cooperative efforts on the part of the various national civil rights organizations. And who are these groups? the NACP, CORE, Congress of Racial Equality, the National Urban League, and the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History, as it was called then, but also the cooperative efforts. And this is the Negro History Bulletin talking, the cooperative efforts with national and local religious, educational, civic groups, and fraternities and sororities. No other thought, no thought, I'm quoting now, no thought should be given to working at cross purposes. So what the article is saying is that we're all in this together. This 1962 piece said, no one organization can solve all of the problems of the Negro, but each organization can make a valuable contribution in a cooperative enterprise seeking enduring freedom and progress for the Negro. So our role was teaching the truth. So if you look at the cover of the bulletin, and that is the next PowerPoint scene, yes, the Proud American covers the February issue of the Negro History Bulletin in 1959. And on it, you see Douglass and Lincoln and the face of Carter G. Woodson and also Mary McLeod Bethune. Now, the sale of the buttons were part of a fundraising campaign for Asala, but they also conveyed the message that Asala was in the midst of change, in the midst of something new and consequential, in which Asala had a role to play. The Negro History Bulletin introduced to its readers Black leaders who represented a range of organization. And so they got interviewed and they all said a few things. And they came from businesses, from fraternal orders, women's club. But I just want to read a couple. They're important because all of the interviews, when they say they are a proud American, what they are referring to is America is changing, and we're helping to make America change by the civil rights movement. So although they remarked on the unfulfilled promise of America, and I emphasize unfulfilled promise, they still expressed their faith in America's becoming what its founding ideals stated. So they use the words new and changing and becoming, and they see they have a part in that change. So for example, Daisy Powell, who was an assistant principal at Shaw Junior High School in Washington, D.C., and this was the same school where my mother taught. I read this to you. I am a proud American because some of our democratic principles in human relations, in civil rights, health, and education are becoming realities. Legislation and an enlightened social outlook have helped implement our political and social aspirations and have strengthened my faith in my country. The president of the National Association of Colored Women's Clubs, Irene McCoy Gaines, she says this, I am proud to be an American, to be part of a great democracy during this period of a changing civilization, instead of toiling within a brainwashed political unit of which can only come destruction. I am proud to be an American so my children and my children's children may expand their activities with the new advantages of the coming era, and so they too may participate in the fast-changing circumstances of the times in which they live. The buttons and other literature were sent to the branches to sell. So this was a fundraising drive, in addition to be an mind-raising campaign. And the association reached out to local and national Black leaders and to white and Black alike to promote this commemoration. And during the years of the Proud American campaign and its button sales, mayors and other selected officials issued proclamations and other statements in commemoration of Black History Week, or Negro History Week as they called it then. For example, in the House of Representatives, the congressman from New York, and his name was Congressman Roosevelt. He was James Roosevelt of New York, and he wrote this, and it's published in the Negro History Bulletin in 1958, but it's also in the congressional record. And he praises not just simply the familiar names of Banneker and Douglas, but he notes the contributions of ordinary, uniquely American people. And why are they unique? Because he identifies, and I'm quoting him, that which has been so interwoven into the American fabric of our national patterns. In other words, what he's saying is that what the world calls American, what comes across to the world as American, much of that is Black, and he identifies Black music and dance. So the articles of the Negro History Bulletin during the 50s and into the early 40s focus not only on the Black freedom struggle, but also on Africa, because remember, during this time period, Africa is gaining its independence from European control. So if you could just see the Black History Bulletin from 1959, you can see there too how that emphasis on America and truth. And even with back to Africa, my father and others from Asala would go to both the Ghanaian and the Nigerian efforts when they are declared free. So this idea of truth, which is so emphasized, denounces, it refutes the suppression, it refutes rather, it suppresses the facts related to African Americans, and is very conscious in its work to get rid of those kind of ideas. One article called attention to the problem of half-truths and untruths, and I quote it, "Only a part of the true American is being taught to each generation. America is not just white America." So what they're saying to the teachers, if that's what you're teaching, that the American tradition is only white America, we want to tell you different. And today, we see a flourishing scholarship based on their work that makes the untruths in 2026 so hard to fathom. You know, it's so difficult to comprehend today the anti-intellectual mindset that is occurring now, that is trying to make long established facts disappear by removing information from websites, from national parks, from museums, the walls of historic buildings, as is the case of the George Washington home there in Philadelphia. Black history today is actually written by people of all races and ethnicities, and it is available for purchase in bookstores and online. Black history today is taught in schools that serve K through 12 students and students in college through doctoral programs. Erasing Black history is all the more an affront to truth. It's an insult to truth because the very sources of the time are digitized. They're easily accessible, primary sources that are self-evident of their time. Nor can anyone deny the tremendous number of books and articles on Black history that are published today. You know, when I've written now the 2026 review, I can't begin to tell you how many books are published. I have a whole new bibliography, and most of the books in the bibliography have published just since 1990 to today. So we must not, and we will not, accept the half-truths and the untruths. I want to close my talk with words from the Proud American campaign in 1963. And I like this campaign because it's the same year that would later witness the March on Washington. And we would listen to Martin Luther King's famous words about his dream for America, and also his dream of the urgency for now, or what he calls the urgency for now, that's coupled with the dream for America. So you can put that last PowerPoint up. I want to close my talk with that. And these are words from February 1963. And these words appear in the Negro History Bulletin. And the words are commemorating this week in 1963. But I believe they are as profoundly relevant to the readers then as they are to us today. We must resist any effort to promote half-truths and untruths about Black people. We must believe, as was told to the people then, that there is a continuing fight for truth, and we are part of that continuum that must work with racial pride toward the goal of democracy for all. So let us believe as they did in the words of the second paragraph, if you read the second paragraph on the left of the screen, and be committed as they were to what America means to them and it means to us. And as each individual, we can say, because I have supported historical truth, which has helped me to feel the spirit of freedom, I have learned to know the spirit of freedom as my birthright, and I will fight any foe, foreign or domestic, in order to secure true American democracy. Thank you. Done.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Karen Williams. I'm actually the PhilaMontco Branch President of ASALA. I'm standing here along with Regina, who is the Philadelphia Heritage Branch. We just quickly wanted to be able to get 2 questions. We'll take one from the audience right now and one from online. If we could just take 2 questions, if you could follow up, Dr. Evelyn Higginbotham, really quickly, just to see if we can answer 2 questions, okay? Anybody in the audience? All right. Yep. Come on up so we can hear your question. If you could state your name and go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, my name's Nabila Bay, and I just had a thought about, have you found any relationship between Paul Robeson and the doctor's philosophy about being a proud American?
I haven't seen, now that's not to say he doesn't, because I need to look. And there are some people who expatriate, like Richard Wright leaves America. James Baldwin will leave America. So you do have that. Paul Robeson is such an important figure. He certainly fought for his passport and won that case to be an American who could travel abroad. But thank you for that question, because I'm gonna look for it.
All right. And then from online, if we could just have one question.
Yes, I am asking, there's quite a few questions, but one from the Zoom. Can you offer any specific actions that lay people can take to further elevate Black history, particularly during America 250, and describe the impact they can have?
Well, they should definitely be members of ASALA, and they should definitely be members of ASALA branches, because they are having those activities. So that is my first and foremost answer. My other answer is that when you hear speakers, and when books are written, read those books, and one of the things I love to tell people, and it's surprising that not enough people know, you have no idea. Go on Amazon and look for children's books on Black history. You will be absolutely amazed. Teach those books to your children. Some of them go as early as kindergarten, and they go through high school.
Thank you so much. I concur with your statement as it's on joining the ASALA branches, which I will be speaking about in a few seconds. But can we just give Dr. Evelyn Brooks Higginbotham so much love for coming on today? Can we clap it up and show some signs online if you can? Go ahead and show some emotions and just show her how much we appreciate her and so much knowledge and things that we have learned in this room today. And I just want to thank you so much for taking the time for being able to share your information and research with us. Again, I stand here on behalf of the PhilaMontco and Philadelphia Heritage Branch to just give you an idea of who Asala is, what we represent, and why we are here. We are standing here on behalf because we are the bearers of our stories. We are the ones who want to tell our narratives from the perspective of the whole truth, as we said this morning. We want to make sure you know that this organization was founded by Dr. Carter G in 1915 and is the nation's leading organization, which is dedicated to researching, preserving, interpreting, and promoting African American history and culture. We're asking you to join the PhilaMontco branch as well as the Philadelphia Heritage Branch and support powerful local and national work that makes our history known. Some people may ask, why should I join Asala? Well, I have plenty of reasons why. But the first would be that we could support some of our initiatives. It takes members to help us put on programs like this. We need funding. We need people to support and come up. So we need you to support some of the things that we're doing right here in Philadelphia, including Freedom Schools, youth programs. We also fund student scholarships. In case you don't know, I have some information out there. We have on lectures. We do exhibits and community events. We also connect educators, historians, and artists. And we are big about advocation. That's our new thing. We're going to advocate for different things as well. And more importantly, we are more about celebrating Black history 365 days. It is not just for 1 month, okay? And we need to be able to have people on our behalf who will be willing to share their stories, help us out, get this information out to the schools, out to the communities as much as possible. I love what we heard earlier because there is a time right now. It's at a time that there are federal efforts that threaten or erase critical parts of our shared history. So we believe that Philadelphia must stand firmly on the side of the whole truth. We need you. We need your participation. You want to know how you can help? You can come see us outside. We'll be out there to share information on membership. But if you don't want to get involved, then guess what? We'll take some donations. Look at this beautiful T-shirt I'm wearing, right? This is one of our fundraisers right now. You can buy them outside. There's $25 to support our local community programs. And then more importantly, come out to the events that we have all the time so that we can get the information out to the local and global community. That's all I had. If you have any questions, we will be in the foyer to answer them, but we invite you to get involved today with us. Thank you so much.
Now, I hope you got my cue. The reason why I got out the camera, she got it. Karen it's hard to say no to her, all right? So you walk right into that. We are doing the work. That's why we appreciate, and I tell people why it's so important for us to be the Historical Society of Pennsylvania. They can get the information out to us that we're not able to do. So we really appreciate the support from the Historical Society of Pennsylvania. We have someone who at the Paul Robeson House in West Philadelphia. So that work is being done. But how many people know that? Joyce Mosley of our branch has done the research, does training. She's at Paul Robeson House, but they need your support as well. Yesterday, we had a wonderful program where Chris Rogers is trying to bring a coalition. Dr. Higginbotham said it. We can't be everywhere. We do what we can do well. All right. And I just want to briefly say what Dr. Higginbotham said about, she was alluding to me when she told me, Regina, you have to do the research. Because we were celebrating our 90th anniversary, and she said, Regina, you got to read the journal. But when I read the journal, that's when I found out the branch was actually 2 years older than the elders had told me. And we got much of our research from the Tribune, because the Tribune was the Facebook of the day. They would put all your business in the Tribune. Justina, and thank you, Dr. Higginbotham. Thank you. And we had to talk about Dr. Jarvis Gibbons, her mentee from Harvard. She mentioned him. He will be here on Saturday. All right, I'll let Justina do that.
And before we end, we just want to read part of the proclamation. If you come back up here, come over up here. Don't you leave me, okay? And we just want to make sure we have this loud and clear. The 2026 Black History Month theme, A Century of Black History Commemorations, will be observed beginning February 1st, 2026, and continuing through January 31st, 2027, marking the centennial of Negro History Week and the 50th anniversary of Black History Month, and it will be carried forward through the public programs, educational initiatives, and community events coordinated by the ASALA, local, state, national, and international branches, and
whereas the Philadelphia Heritage Branch of the Association of the Study of African American Life and History is the oldest continuous operating branch, co-founded by Dr. Carter G. Woodson, civil rights attorney Raymond Pace Alexander, and 18 movers and shakers, charter members of the Philadelphia community. And we will observe this historic period as it prepares to celebrate its centennial on November the 11th, 2027.
And whereas the PhilaMontco branch of ASALA has for more than 25 years advanced similar work through the expansion and collaborations with Philadelphia arts and education communities, including the establishment of a Freedom School in partnership with Mother Bethel African Methodist Episcopal Church.
Whereas the city of Philadelphia commemorates its 250-year history, it is fitting to recognize African Americans have been integral to the city's stories across every century, from the enslaved Africans held at the President's House of George Washington on the grounds of what is now the Liberty Bell Center, to the courageous work of William Still and the Underground Railroad, and the city's historic free Black population during the colonial period, the Great Migration, and development of Negro history clubs that evolved into the Philadelphia Heritage Branch of ASALA.
Whereas the government recognizes Black History Month and affirms the public responsibility to support historical accuracy, education, inclusion, and civic engagement, and to encourage all residents to engage with the full and shared history of our country. We resolve that the Council of the City of Philadelphia hereby honors and celebrates the Philadelphia heritage and PhilaMontco branches of Association for the Study of African Life and History, and calls upon the residents,
educators, institutions, and community organizations to observe Black History Month through reflection, learning, and participation in programs that honor the enduring legacy and contributions of African Americans to the city,
the Commonwealth, and the nation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And Dr. Higginbotham, one thing with this technology that we elders have to get used to, the New York branch sent me a text. Oh, Regina, you forgot to mention she was the former president of ASALA.
Thank you, everyone. I'm Justina Barrett. I'm here to close out the webinar, but not before we don't give you another round of applause, all of you, for showing up in the room. It's raining and starting to snow. And for all of you on Zoom, we're so lucky that you joined us. You will be connected with us. We will be sending the recording of this to everybody who registered, and it will ultimately get up onto our YouTube page. Other calls to action, hsp.org/enews, so you can follow us and hear about our amazing digitization projects, including the American Negro Historical Society records. We have some of them on view downstairs through April 24th and Changing Faces of Independence, but it's an amazing collection of those 19th century ancestors who started the work 150 to 200 years ago. We're going to be digitizing that in its entirety, so please stay connected with us and dive into it. The second call to action, Dr. Washington in the chat mentioned that Dr. Jarvis Givens will be not here at HSP, but with the school district next weekend. So we will include that link in your follow-up email as well. So if you are an educator, if you want to get involved in teaching the next generation, there's a great conference next weekend. The community is welcome. Yes, everything the school district is doing, they are doing it in partnership with the community. And then finally, we are hosting in April digital on-site teacher workshops for the work we're doing to get that American Negro Historical Society collection out to teachers. So please join us for that. And finally, your call to action is just to go home and talk to your family. If you are the elder in your community, in your church, in your household, make sure that next generation, Dr. Higginbotham, I know you were embarrassed as a child when you saw your papa wearing that button. He knew what it meant and it stuck with you then. So break through that discomfort with the teenagers and the youth. They are really, actually really eager to hear your perspective, even if they're putting on their teenager face. It is so vital that we equip the next generation to know how to find it. Where is it in the attic? Where is it in the library? Where is it in your community? Please join us in that call to action to make history yours. Thank you so much. For the folks on site, we'll go have a few munchies. For the folks on Zoom, look for a follow-up email tomorrow afternoon and stay connected with us. Have a safe afternoon.